We've known that antibiotics can result in depression and other mental health conditions for quite some time now. In fact, the first report of antibiotic-induced depression appeared in the scientific literature in 2010. The case report tells us of a 75-year-old patient with no history of mental illness who experienced acute depression following antibiotic treatment for a wound infection. After the third dose of antibiotics, his mental health rapidly declined, and he was so severely depressed to the point that he was contemplating ending his own life. Treatment with the antibiotic was quickly stopped, and the patient's depression symptoms began to improve 2 days later. And 4 days on, the 75-year-old was back to his normal self. The culprit is believed to have been levofloxacin, a drug belonging to the fluoroquinolone class of antibiotics. Fluoroquinolones are some of the most commonly prescribed medications in the world. For example, in the United States, more than 35 million outpatient prescriptions for fluoroquinolones were filled in 2015 alone. And major depression has long been known to be an adverse side effect of these antibiotics. However, this had only ever been observed in patients with a prior history of depression, which typically led doctors to dismiss these side effects. In other words, the doctors were blaming these side effects on the patient's mental health rather than the antibiotic that the patient had been prescribed. This 2010 case report challenged this notion for the first time. It showed instead that fluoroquinolone antibiotics could indeed cause severe depression in a patient with no history of mental health problems. Since then, a 2016 study illustrated that the use of fluoroquinolones was frequently associated with psychiatric adverse effects. In this study, 72% of patients reported anxiety, 62% depression, and 48% experienced insomnia after taking a fluoroquinolone antibiotic. Have you ever experienced mental health symptoms after taking antibiotics? Tell me in the comments below. Part of what makes fluoroquinolones such powerful antibiotics for treating various infections is that they are bactericidal as opposed to bacteriostatic. This means that instead of just preventing the growth of new bacteria, these antibiotics will actively kill the offending microorganisms. Unfortunately, however, beneficial bacteria residing in your gut and known collectively as the gut microbiome end up as collateral damage of this warfare. This is what results in the antibiotic-induced depression that many patients experience. But antibiotics aside, it's becoming increasingly apparent that the gut microbiome plays an essential role in regulating our mood and keeping our mental health whole. My name is Hesham and I'm a medical doctor and University of Cambridge graduate. I create weekly videos about the human brain, what you can do with it, and how you can make it work better for you. This is the second video in a 3-part series about the gut microbiome. In my last video, I looked at how the trillions of bacteria living inside the gut can either result in or protect from a whole host of neurodegenerative and neurodevelopmental conditions like Parkinson's, ALS, and autism. Next week, we'll look at probiotics and the ketogenic diet and how these two affect the gut microbiome and therefore the brain. If you don't want to miss that video, remember to take action and subscribe, and you may just unlock your action potential. It's no secret that research into new drugs for psychiatric conditions like depression and anxiety has stalled in recent years and now lags decades behind the rest of the pharmaceutical industry. For example, SSRIs are a commonly prescribed class of antidepressants that work by blocking the reuptake of the neurotransmitter serotonin, which is known to play an essential role in regulating mood. However, research into the first SSRI, fluoxetine, commonly known as Prozac, was published way back in 1974. And almost 50 years later, fluoxetine is still one of the most prescribed treatments for depression. Now, there is nothing necessarily wrong with this, except that the research suggests that up to 40% of people with depression typically don't respond to the antidepressants that we have available to us. This is known as treatment-resistant depression and is often associated with worse health outcomes and quality of life. Clearly, there is a need for better treatments, and the gut microbiome might just be the best place to start. Here's why. Research has consistently shown that depressed people lack the same two key species of bacteria in their guts. In 2019, scientists working in Belgium and the Netherlands were able to identify two species of bacteria that were almost always missing from the guts of people diagnosed with depression. The bacteria belong to the Faecalibacterium and the Coprococcus genus. This perhaps explains earlier, more crude experiments where depressed mice, which received fecal transplants from healthy mice, would go on to be cured of their depression. One case report actually tells the story of a severely depressed 79-year-old lady. In fact, her depression was so severe that she stopped eating altogether and lost nearly 25 kilograms over 6 months. The doctors tried everything, from therapy to various antidepressants, and nothing seemed to work. That is until the doctors performed a fecal transplant from her healthy 6-year-old great-grandson. 200 milliliters of gut bacteria were transferred from the child to their great-grandmother, and the grandmother began to improve dramatically over the next 6 months following the procedure. For those of you familiar with it, her PHQ-9 score went from a whopping 21 to 4, and the weight that she'd lost, she gained it all back in 6 months. The gut microbiome also plays a central role in anxiety, as studies show that the brains of animals that lack gut bacteria from birth develop differently from those that do. These animals typically have elevated levels of stress hormones like corticosterone and will behave differently when faced with stressful situations. What's more is that it appears that early life stress, such as that caused by childhood abuse, neglect, and chaotic home environments, can permanently modify the gut microbiome. In the study, scientists showed that women who had experienced adverse events in their childhood had increased levels of the gut bacteria Prevotella, which in turn was significantly associated with blood cortisol, interleukin-6, and TNF-alpha and CRP levels, all of which happen to be inflammatory markers. Scientists now believe that a balanced gut microbiome curbs inflammation inside the body and brain in health. However, when the balance is disturbed, certain bad bacteria can trigger inflammation by producing inflammatory molecules. These can cross the blood-brain barrier and enter the brain, resulting in depression and anxiety. But inflammation isn't the only way that these gut bacteria work. You may remember from my last video that gut bacteria are responsible for either producing or modifying approximately half of all the small molecules floating around in your blood right now. And one of the molecules produced by some of these gut bacteria happens to be serotonin, the very same neurotransmitter that regulates your mood and that antidepressants like Prozac target. Streptococcus, Enterococcus, Pseudomonas, and Escherichia bacteria are all known to produce serotonin from tryptophan in the gut. Even though the serotonin produced by the gut is too large to cross the blood-brain barrier and enter the brain, its metabolism still affects serotonin levels in the brain. When tryptophan in the gut is not metabolized into serotonin by good bacteria, it becomes the target of other bad bacteria. These bacteria metabolize tryptophan into kynurenine, which does cross the blood-brain barrier and does enter the brain, where it appears to suppress the production of serotonin. Serotonin isn't the only neurotransmitter produced by gut bacteria, however. The gut microbiome also produces vast quantities of dopamine, noradrenaline, and acetylcholine, all of which are crucial for brain communication and human behavior. One neurotransmitter produced by Lactobacillus and Bifidobacterium is GABA, which sends inhibitory signals across the brain and thus has a calming effect, where it reduces anxiety, stress, and fear. The ancient Greeks believed that mental problems arose when the digestive tract produced too much black bile. And more than 2,000 years later, it's pretty humbling to think that they may have been onto something that modern science and medicine had long since dismissed. It's becoming increasingly clear that the gut and the brain are inextricably connected to each other, and that bacteria in the gut can shape the development of our brains, determine our overall mental health, and shape our behavior in novel and fascinating ways. But where there is vulnerability, there is also opportunity. Currently, most probiotics are over-the-counter supplements. The bacterial strains on offer tend to be very limited, and the health benefits are vague and largely unproven. Several biotech startups are working to change this, however. Their goal is to develop new probiotics, each with its unique preparation, carefully selected strains of bacteria, and proven to treat specific conditions by rigorous academic studies. The next generation of probiotics will be less supplement and more pharmaceutical, and could offer hope for the millions of people worldwide whose mental health problems don't respond to the treatments currently available. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to not miss the third part of this series, which should come in the next couple of weeks. In the meantime, check out my free Substack newsletter if you'd like to access the research papers I used to create this video. Link as always in the description below. See you all next week.